back everybody for threading part 2. Today we're going to talk about what's called background worker object. It comes from the background worker class, and the situations in where you want to use a background worker would be where you would like to update the UI of the application. In part 1 we talked about a way in which you can kind of get around that and kind of cheat to get around that, but the problem is it's really unsafe and it's not really the standard practice to do that anymore. So this is the correct way to update the UI. There are some more threading practices which we'll go through in parts 3 and 4, where we're going to get into async and also thread pool. Now, the reason why you might want to use background worker versus a thread pool, so a thread pool is basically a pool of threads which so instead of having to create a new thread each time, it can take an existing thread object and create another thread out of that, and basically reusing the thread object so that you're not continually creating a whole bunch of threads. The situation where you would use a background worker versus a thread pool, you would use a background worker in situations where you might only be creating a couple threads in your program, a couple extra threads. You have your main UI thread, and then you might just create a couple extra threads. In that case, you want to go ahead and stick with the background worker, and if you're going to use probably a more than 3 extra threads, you might want to consider using a thread pool. So, like I said, we'll talk more about thread pool in our next lesson. So this lesson is background worker. The way you create a background worker is you just simply instantiate an instance of that object, name it, and then you can we basically have the way that this class is set up, background worker, is that it has these 3 events right here, and if you remember our event lesson before, basically these events are going to be fired at certain times, and then it's up to us to kind of tell it what to do. It's up to us to kind of listen to those events and put actions behind them when they actually happen. So basically these methods right here, the report progress, these methods in this way right here will fire these events up here, and then our code will actually be listening to those events and execute the appropriate method that we want. So let's start with our first one. Now, we don't have to wire all of these up if we don't want to, but we're going to wire up a couple of them in our case. We're going to wire up let's see, where's that here? I'm not seeing it. Should be a do work one in here. Oh, there it is right there. I just wasn't able to see it. Okay, so we're going to wire this one up here, and notice that it has this nice thing. If we click tab, it lets us go ahead. It generates out a method for us, and we can also create a stub really quickly by clicking on this right here, generate stub. All it really does is basically just creates this method for us. We could have done it by hand and then plugged it into here, but generally you want to have the methods. This do work event is being fired by this right here, by this BTW. So that's kind of that's generally the syntax that you'll see. Similar to this button one click handler, but anyway, we don't want to go into events. If you need to revisit events, take a peek at the lesson on events. Okay, so this event is going to fire, and what we want to do is we're going to, just like the previous example, we're going to have to do some sort of operation that takes a certain amount of time. In fact, we're actually just going to create a for loop, because we want to actually report back the progress, so you'll see that in a second. So we're going to just loop through for 10 seconds. So we're going to sleep, and we're going to sleep for 1 second for each iteration of this for each loop. So right now, that's where it's occurring. So that process is going to take 10 seconds. Now there's another event. There's a couple other events actually that we want to watch. Another event is called run completed. Now this event right here, we'll go ahead and generate this stub out just like we did the last one. Come on here. This event right here, run worker completed, this occurs when this entire do work block is finished. So once it's done doing work, it's going to set off an event, a run worker completed event. And this one actually occurs, so this is going to occur on background thread. So this is not our main thread. When it actually completes, this code right here runs on the main thread, which is the UI thread. So it's the same thread. So the cool thing about this is that we can update some text here, and we don't have to worry about the cross-threading issue that we ran into before, because this does run on the same thread. So this is how you do want to do what we are doing in Lesson 1. This is the appropriate way to update the UI. Okay, so we've got it doing some work on a background thread. When it gets done, it's going to update this text. Now there is another event that's kind of nice to look at. And that event is called the progress change. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to make another stub for that. So the progress change, basically, when we're doing our work, sometimes we like to get updated at certain times that things have occurred. So this progress changed basically can occur anytime we want it to, and we're going to actually cause it to fire down in our do work. So we're going to stick in here some code that basically allows us to update the progress. And the way we do that is, remember that when this event happens, it's passing in the object that this is occurring on, which happens to be this BGW object. So if we want to work with that object, we actually have to cast it to the appropriate type. So let's just go ahead and do that here. Oops. Sender. No, I'm not going to do it the other way because I haven't explained that one yet in any lesson. So basically, we're taking the sender that's been passed in, we're casting it as a background worker, and we're going to refer to it here. And the event that we're interested in is we want to fire the progress changed event, just like follows. Oops. Let me check here. Okay, let's run. Oh, report progress. Okay, that's the one we want to use. Okay, so basically we're going to report back, and it wants to have an integer on basically how far are we into the process, and it passes it over here. And let's go ahead and create a progress bar on this form. And what we're going to do is we're going to update the progress bar with our stuff. So this progress bar is going to coincide with this label over here. Let's go back to code, and the progress bar, let's go ahead and give it some value. Max is going to be 10. And what we're going to do is we're going to increment the value up here. We're going to set it equal to progress percentage. Okay. Which is also an integer. Okay. Alright, so this is going to basically, every time that it's going through this loop, it's going to be reporting back the progress, and we've hooked this up to here. Now, you wouldn't have to necessarily do anything with it, but we could actually just have it fire some other block of code. It doesn't really matter. But we're going to be updating this progress bar each time it goes through this for loop with this event. So we have 3 events that we're subscribing to, and we're going to be doing different things with those. I also created, as you can see, I created another button on the main thread that is going to do some main thread work. All it's going to do is it's going to update label 2, and we're going to use this to show that we can actually have access to the main thread, and there's no blocking that occurs on the main thread while we're performing operations on this background worker thread. Okay, I think we're all set to try this out here. Let's go ahead and start it up here. Hopefully we don't run into any issues. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click this main thread thing, and we notice that on the main thread we can, all it does is just basically tacks on to this label right here. Let's go ahead and fire up this start background worker, and we'll notice that for every second we should end up having a tick through here unless something's broken. And I think we probably have something broken right here. Oh, yes, forgot one vital piece. Okay, so on our button click, we're creating this background worker and everything. Let's actually move this code up to here so that it only gets created once. So it's going to get created in the constructor of our form. But the important thing is to actually get. Let's just settle this guy up here so we got access to it. Okay, so we have this variable right here, BGW, and in order to actually get the background worker to start, you have to run worker async. That basically says, okay, start up the process, get that background worker started, and up here we have told it all the events to subscribe to. So basically says, okay, go ahead and set all these events up, and then it works. So let's go ahead and check this out now. We actually didn't have this button wired up, so we still have the main thread that does what it needs to do, and this thread over here, let's see. Okay, so we have a little issue with that right there. Okay, so background workers by default, let me stop that for a second, they don't report progress, so what we have to do is we have to tell it that it's going to support that. So worker supports cancellation, that's not the one. Worker reports progress. So that's a boolean. So basically we're telling it that we're allowed to report progress events to it. Go ahead and try that again. We're debugging on the fly here. It's the first time for this code here, so let's try that again. Okay, so you see it's going through, and we also have access to our main thread while this background worker is updating this progress bar. When it gets done, we'll notice that it says background worker done. And we were off by 1 because we started at 0 and we're only technically going to 9. So this thing, technically only goes to 9 because I only makes it to 9 because it's less than 10. It starts at 0 to 9. Okay, well, hopefully you'll be able to use background worker in your code, and remember to use background worker when you're going to be running maybe 2 or 3 extra threads besides your main thread. And it's the ideal way of basically doing work on your main thread while work is also being done in the background, and things get updated to the main thread, and everything is completely thread safe.